Hi, on today's video I will be building a TV stand from these birch boards. Like with many of my builds, I first started by rough cutting the boards to make it easier to run them through the jointer. Once again, I have made a picture with the dimensions for the build, so I had an idea on how many pieces and which length I would need. Once I had cut all the boards, it was time to move to the jointer and run all the boards through that, and then the planer as well, before moving on to the table saw to cut the remaining edge straight. After having all the boards ready, it was time to start the glue ups, and I say glue ups, as per usual I will be making multiple ones due to the lack of clamps. First, after laying all the boards on the table, I check the grain orientation to make sure that the direction is altering between each board. This is to ensure that the panel would stay more straight during the years. After that, I mark each of the joint with I for in and O for out before running those edges on the jointer, ins facing inside the fence and outs the outside. This will make sure that the edges complement each other and I will have a flat joint. Once all that was done, it was time to spread the glue, and as you can see here, I was making two individual panels, and that's why I leave one board in the middle, as there is a seam that doesn't need glue. To make sure that the joints are as flat as I can make them, I took out a mallet and an offcut and hit any of the boards that were too high, as the boards are not dead straight, but some of them had a curve to them. The next morning, after hiking through the snow that had fallen during the night, it was time to take the panels out of clamps and repeat the previous steps for the next set of panels. The next step was quite time consuming, as I don't have wide enough planer and all the panels needed some planing due to not being perfect. I had to hand plane all the panels that I made, and as my workbench is quite small and light, I had to put it against the wall to ensure that it doesn't move when I plane the panels. Eventually, after finding out some muscles I had never known about as they were sore from all the planing, it was time to move to the table saw and start ripping the panels to their final width. Then, before starting to cut the panels to their final length, I needed to swap out the blade on the table saw. This was the first build I used blades specifically made for rip and cross cutting, and I think the cut quality was much better using these specific blades. Two of the panels I just squared from one end and then measured the right distance for the other cut. These will be the top and bottom panels, but for the others I cut those into two pieces. I made all the panels longer to reduce the glue ups needed. And using the hold down clamp on the table saw was really useful on the long pieces to make them stay stable. Then it was time to do the joinery. Unlike many bigger YouTubers, I am not going to use the Festool Domino, but to be honest, if I had one, I would. But instead I will be using a doweling jig and a drill for making the holes, and then, surprise surprise, dowels for the joints. It is an easy way to make joints, maybe not as easy as Domino would be, but nevertheless. Once I had drilled all the holes to the ends that needed them, I moved on to drilling the corresponding holes. It is rather simple on the end pieces, but with the shelves and the middle dividers it requires a bit more work to mark everything down and to make sure that everything's squared. But while I'm doing that, I think this is a good point to remind you that if you are enjoying this video, please consider leaving it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel as well. And to make it easier to assemble this in the future, I marked down each joint with a number. Now that all the joinery was done, I could assemble the TV stand, and make a rabbet to the back of the stand for the back panel. I won't be attaching the back panel to the whole length of the stand, but only for 2/3 of it, the part that will have doors. Then on the end, I will have open shelving where I will be putting my PlayStation, and for it to have better air circulation, I want the back to be open. So, for making the rabbet, I thought the easiest way would be to have a rabbeting bit with bearings and to route it into the build. But I do think it might be easier to do with a routing table rather than a handheld router, but I got to work with what I got. Now that the rabbet had been done, I could also measure what the final depth for the internal dividers and shelves would be and then cut them. Then it was time to do another time-consuming part, which was sanding everything before I could start the assembly. I sanded everything up to 180 grit. Once I was done with that, I could start assembling the stand. I divided the assembly into 2 parts as I don't have enough clamps to do it in one go. So on the first one, I glued up all the shelves to the vertical pieces. Once those had dried overnight, I glued the top and the bottom on as well. While the glue up was drying, I could start working on the legs and the doors. For the legs, I just cut some of the cut-offs to 3 cm wide strips, about 1.25 inches, then cross-cut them to be the depth of the stand. Then I had to cut the 2 doors to the right size as well, first squaring off one end and then cross-cutting it into size. After that, I also had to sand the doors and the legs as well. After I was done with that, I needed to start installing the hardware on the doors. I used the Craig concealed hinge jig to drill the holes for the hinges on the doors. And with a combi square made sure that the hinges were straight and drilled the pilot holes for the screws. Then, for the door pulls, I made a jig from a scrap piece to align the holes on the same spot on each door and that they were on the right spot as well. To attach the legs to the build, I drilled a hole midway through the leg and then a smaller hole all the way through in the middle of the previous hole. I used a bigger drill bit than what my screws are to allow seasonal movement on the stand. To jump from one job to another, I then continued on the hinges and attached the other pieces to the stand so I could attach the doors on them. I just laid the stand on its side to align the door to the right spot. This was an easy way to attach the other door, but as the second door is in the middle of the stand, that was a bit more tricky, but the outcome was nice at the end. Before I could move to finishing the project, I still needed to drill pilot holes for the leg screws to the bottom of the stand. And to do that, I just laid the leg on top of the stand, made sure it's square and drilled away. Then to the finish. For that, I used Rubio Monocoat Oil in the color of Bourbon. I figured out that an easy way to measure the oil and the accelerator is to use a recyclable spoon. Once the finish had dried for a couple of days, I could put the stand back together and the project was done. Before removing the hinges, I marked each of them with blue tape to know where they would go, so the adjustments were right already. It's not perfect. Some of the joints are not as tight as I would like them to be, as I didn't have enough clamps, but gladly those are not that visible as the gaps are either on the back side or behind the doors. Overall, I am happy with how the stand turned out. It is simple but functional and has room for all the things that we need to store in it. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.